Today, we are going on a bit of a journey. We're going to connect a quiet monk's garden from the 1800s all the way to a family in the Appalachian Hills with a really startling secret. It's a story that, believe it or not, gets to the very heart of how all of our genetics actually work. So just try to picture this. It's 1960. You're a doctor, and a family walks into your clinic. They're clearly shy, maybe a little embarrassed, trying not to draw attention. And when you get a closer look, you see why. The doctor who actually met them, a hematologist named Madison Coleman, put it pretty bluntly. They were bluer than hell. And no, this was not some kind of trick of the light. For more than 100 years, the Fugate family, living way out in a remote community called Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, were known for this. Their striking, literally blue skin. I mean, their community was so cut off from the rest of the world that seeing an outsider was a major event. It's just so bizarre, right? It baffled everyone for decades. How on earth could a whole family have blue skin? Well, it turns out the answer wasn't hidden in the mountains of Kentucky at all. It was waiting in a quiet monastery garden over in Austria with a monk who was just, well, really into his pea plants. So, to crack this mystery wide open, we have to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the 19th century and meet the guy who, without even knowing it, would lay the foundation for all of modern genetics. His name was Gregor Mendel. He was a monk, but he was also a biologist, and he spent years in his garden doing thousands of super careful experiments, breeding pea plant after pea plant. And in the process, he figured out the basic rules of heredity, how traits get passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, so check out how his classic experiment worked. First, he took a purebred yellow-seeded plant and crossed it with a purebred green one. Now, you'd think you might get some kind of yellow-green mix, right? Wrong. Every single one of the offspring had yellow seeds. It was like the green trait just vanished. But then, and this is where it gets really cool, he let those new yellow-seeded plants fertilize themselves, and bam! Suddenly, the green trait was back, showing up in about a quarter of the new plants. It hadn't disappeared at all. It was just hiding. This led Mendel to a huge aha moment. He realized there were two kinds of traits. The one that always shows up, like the yellow seeds, he called dominant. And the one that could hide, like the green seeds, he called recessive. The big idea here is that a recessive trait only gets to show itself when that dominant one isn't around to steal the spotlight. So Mendel called these little instructions factors, but of course, today we've got much more specific language. So let's quickly run through the modern vocabulary we need to decode these kinds of genetic stories. First up, we've got the gene. This is the basic unit of inheritance. Just think of it like a recipe for a single trait, a recipe for eye color, a recipe for hair color, or in our case, the recipe for the color of a pea seed. But, recipes can have variations. And these different versions of a gene are called alleles. So for that seed color gene, you've got the yellow allele and you've got the green allele. They're just different flavors of the same basic instruction. The specific mix of alleles you get from your parents, well, that's your genotype. It's the genetic code working behind the scenes. We usually show it with letters, a big letter for the dominant allele and a little one for the recessive. And the thing you can actually see, the physical trait that you get from that code, that's the phenotype. So think of it this way. Genotype is the code, phenotype is what you see in the mirror. Yellow seeds, green seeds, blue skin, all of those are phenotypes. Let's drill down just a little bit more. If you have two of the same alleles, like two yellows, we call that genotype homozygous. But if you have two different alleles, one of each, it's heterozygous. And this is so important. Someone who is heterozygous can be a silent carrier of a recessive trait. They have it, but you'd never know by looking at them. All right, so we've got the lingo down, but how can we actually use this stuff to predict what traits kids might have? Well, it turns out there's a really simple, almost elegant tool for that. So way after Mendel, in the early 1900s, a British geneticist named Reginald Punnett came up with this brilliant little diagram. It's basically a simple grid that lets us figure out the odds of any genetic cross. Let's see how it works. Say you have two guinea pigs. They both have black fur, which is the dominant trait. But they're both heterozygous, meaning they each secretly carry the recessive allele for white fur. So we just put one parent's alleles across the top, the others down the side, and then fill in the boxes like a little multiplication table. It neatly lays out every single possible genetic combo for their babies. So what's the result? Well, that simple square tells us that, on average, there's a 75% chance that an offspring will have black fur. That's the dominant phenotype. And there's a 25% chance it'll have the recessive phenotype, white fur. See? Each box is a 25% probability. Okay, we've got Mendel's principles, we've got Punnett square, we now have everything we need. It's time to go back to Troublesome Creek and finally solve the mystery of the blue people of Kentucky. So, what was really going on? After decades of speculation, scientists figured it out. It was an incredibly rare blood disorder called methemoglobinemia. It basically keeps a blood from carrying oxygen the right way, which makes it look bluish. And, just like Mendel's green peas, it's caused by a very rare recessive allele. You see, the guy who started the family line, Martin Fugate, and his wife Elizabeth Smith were both carriers of this allele without even knowing it. And because their community was so isolated, their kids and grandkids often married cousins who were also much more likely to be carriers. So let's plug that into our Punnett square and see what happens when two carriers have kids. And there it is. That's our answer. Every single time two carriers had a child, there was a 25% chance, a 1 in 4 shot, that the child would get 2 copies of that recessive allele, giving them the RR genotype and the blue skin phenotype. The isolation of the community just made a statistically rare event happen over and over again. Mystery solved. But look, this story isn't just about pea plants or one fascinating family in Kentucky. These exact same rules of inheritance, well, they're writing your genetic story right now. So why does this all matter to you? Because these principles are at play in countless human traits. Things like having dimples or red hair, or even those weirdly flexible double-jointed thumbs. They also explain how serious inherited disorders like cystic fibrosis get passed down. And maybe most importantly, they explain how any one of us could be a carrier for a condition and have absolutely no idea. So I want you to think about your own family. You know those traits that seem to pop up generation after generation? That specific hair color, the family nose, a certain kind of smile. That's all part of a genetic story being written by dominant and recessive alleles. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the distinctive traits that run in your family? And what hidden genetic story might they be telling?